He might have an issue with you peeing in the
Well,
repository for the brush.
that was over years. A few drops kept falling in.
A few drops.
There's always splatter.
Where you just like take a little eyedropper and like pour. I gotta get a little more urine in that thing right today.
I'm doing a little science experiment.
I want to see how long it'll take before someone notices it and says, "Clean it."
Maybe the urine will attain sentience if I let it sit for 2 years.
Yes, and you'll have like this urine animal growing from your bathroom where it
A
comes
urine
out,
jellyfish.
and it decides to move into one of the other rooms in your apartment. It's like, I'm. You have created me, Father. I am joining you now.
It sounds like Little Shop of Horrors.
Feed me, Greg Moore.
Feed me, Greg.
Welcome to another episode of the Law Offices of Quibble, Squabble, and Bicker on this July 13th, 2022. We have a very special guest today. We haven't had an author in quite a while. It's Dr. Dan Chodorkoff. I can't even pronounce things. Chodorkoff, is that correct?
Correct. Very good.
Okay. Dr. Dan Chodorkoff is the former director and co-founder of the Institute for Social Ecology, and he's written the book Sugaring Down. It's his second novel, third book, I believe, which came out, I believe, at the end of last year. And he may or may not stick around when we address our client, Hippies versus Soap. That'll be later on in the show.
Behold, trapped in a hellscape of their own invention, socially unaware old white men bound by the pretense of being fake lawyers yet knowing no law, no exquisite Latin terminology, they are inexplicably compelled to quibble over minutia, squabble over triflings, and bicker like those who value their backyards far too highly without even knowing the difference between an easement and an alleyway. At this very moment, you have entered the heart of the Law Offices of Quibble, Squabble, and Bicker. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Sid.
And I'm Nancy.
Come on out to Sid and Nancy's Nickel Emporium, where everybody gets a nickel for whatever you're trading.
We have purple nickels, green nickels, even nickel nickels.
Bring in an envelope and you get a nickel.
Bring in a couch and you get a nickel.
You know you want a shiny new nickel for that antique dresser, so bring it right in.
Everyone knows pennies are worthless, so why settle for less than a nickel?
Have no space for that brand new stove? We'll take care of it for you. Trade it in for a nickel. We've got bags of them.
Some people say don't take wooden nickels, but we'll give them to you so you don't have to take them.
So remember, at Sid and Nancy's Nickel Emporium, no one walks away with empty pockets. Everybody gets a nickel.
Each nickel is certified legal tender for the United States government, not to be used as food items. Sid and Nancy's Nickel Emporium cannot be held responsible for any nickels stuck in anyone's body orifices. Please use nickels responsibly.
Sid and Nancy's Nickel Emporium were so satisfied with the work that we did for them last time that they just chose to re-sponsor the show.
Well, they were satisfied with the exposure we gave them.
I know, they always
Their
get
business went through the roof.
Everybody gets a nickel. Anyway, enough of this silliness. Onward to Dr. Chodorkoff with his, as the book is Sugaring Down. Now, I don't know if you know this, Dr. Chodorkoff, or you prefer us to call you Dan?
Please.
Dan. Yeah. Is that sugaring is also a term that's used instead of the term waxing now by people who are doing like Brazilians and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So you have like two different meanings for your title of your book now.
Of course, my title comes from the process of making maple sugar, which is an old Vermont tradition.
There was a third meeting when I used to go to the sex club, sugaring.
Oh, really, Greg? What was that?
But I don't want to talk about it. This is a clean podcast.
It's
I'll keep it clean.
That'll be the day that you make this a clean podcast. I'm surprised that you're even censoring yourself at all, Greg. I'm shocked, honestly.
I appreciate it.
So, please give us a brief synopsis of your book and how you came about with the concept and what people have been finding the most fascinating about it.
Well, the book is based in northern Vermont, where I've lived for over 50 years. And it takes place in 1968 and 1969. It's about a group of young people who moved to an old abandoned hill farm in the northeast kingdom of Vermont to start a commune of sorts. They envision it as a political collective. They're sort of refugees from the anti-war movement. They've all been through a long period of struggle trying to end the war in Viet Nam. They're a little burned out. They envision their commune as a safe haven, a place where they can recharge their batteries, a place where other people who need to recharge their batteries can come. They want to continue to do anti-war work. They do draft counseling. They help draft evaders across the border. And the action unfolds over the course of 2 years, and we look at the dynamics within the commune. Excuse me. We look at the dynamics within, my wife.
Special guest star, Beth.
Betsy.
Betsy.
Oh, Betsy.
Yeah. So we look at the dynamics within the commune. The two main characters are a couple, at least at the beginning of the book. We look at their struggles to establish themselves in this small, insular, rural community. They met initially with a lot of hostility, but they also have some old Vermonters as neighbors who take them under their wing and essentially teach them how to survive through a Vermont winter and teach them how to garden, expose them to making maple syrup, and get them involved more in the life of the towns through the town's community meeting. Meanwhile, they're beginning to ramp up their anti-war activity. And eventually they come to a point where some members of the commune and one of the couple become convinced that the only way to actually bring about change is through more militant forms of action. And they're all former members of Students for Democratic Society, SDS, which was a large anti-war organization back in the 60s, had 300,000 members and 300 chapters around the country. But in 1969, the organization splintered and some people began what was known as the Weatherman faction, which undertook a campaign of symbolic bombings against various governmental and corporate targets that they felt were contributing to the war effort. So we look at the tension that exists within the anti-war movement. That's a major theme, really, of the book, and how that tension affects relationships within the commune and the relationships of the couple, particularly. So there are a series of, experiences that they go through that the book really tries to place within the context of the times. And I don't really want to give away the ending. I'd like readers to.
That's totally fine. What actually was the cause for you to actually want to write this book? Because I was watching an interview of yours. You said you're kind of a slow, organic author. You don't do things in big chunks. So I'd imagine that it took a while for the inspiration to hit you to make you go, okay, I think I want to do this story. Yeah. Or is it based upon your own life?
The idea had been kicking around for a long time. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and one of the things that I've studied is social movements. And of course, as a young person in the 60s, I was caught up in the counterculture and the anti-war movement myself. And I wanted to examine that period with a little more historical distance. And I felt that there were some important lessons that could be drawn from it. So that was really the motivation. And of course, like most authors, I did draw on personal experience.
Did you live in a commune back then?
I spent some time on a commune. I lived in a number of informal communes and one formal commune. I was active in the anti-war movement. Some of the incidents that take place in the book are really based on my own experiences, and some of them are complete fiction. It is a novel. I'm going to emphasize that. It's not an autobiography, because some people have tried to read it that way. And really the motivation was to try to tease out what I thought were some important lessons to be learned, to examine the tension between social change and the sort of seductiveness sometimes that violence can have. It seems like a way to jumpstart things or to move them along, or people sometimes turn in that direction simply out of frustration. So, I felt like we're at a point today where we're seeing social movements begin to emerge that are going to have to deal with those issues. And I felt that there were, as I've said repeatedly in this interview, lessons to be learned from that time that I wanted to try to tease out, and wanted to present them in a way that was not didactic or academic, but in the context of a story that was engaging, that was character-driven, and that could really draw readers in and hopefully reach a larger audience than an academic treatise.
Did you know any weathermen?
Did I know any? Yeah, I did.
And were some of them actually just like we do have to do this, because I mean, it does get to the point where I can imagine it's not like you're a terrorist; it's just you're fed up. It's just the government doesn't listen. They keep doing these horrible things. What are you going to do? But were some of them just hooligans who just wanted to do violence, and they were just bastards anyway? Or
I think the people that I knew, certainly, and the people that I encountered in that organization were all thoughtful and very idealistic, extremely idealistic and well-meaning, and were acting out of a sense of outrage and frustration and a feeling that, this was really the only way we were going to change things. And of course, the 60s was a time when there was tremendous change afoot. And people saw this as a way to accelerate it, a way to stand in solidarity with the victims of U.S. imperialism, a way to express active solidarity with the growing Black Power movement at that point, which was facing much more governmental repression than the anti-war movement. So there was plenty of that going on as well during that time. So my experience was that they were idealistic, well-meaning, thoughtful people, but they got caught up in the internal logic of an ideology that was really simply wrong, simply misunderstood where the American people were at.
I heard a story about an old school lefty. He was a young man, but he was an old school lefty in the SDS. He was really into it. And then he said by 68, he remembered he was just so disgusted. We're at this big SDS convention. Half the kids were just yelling. They were just yelling, Ho Chi Minh, Mao Zedong. And he was just like, this is not what I signed up for.
Ho Chi Minh, NLF.
Yeah, but Mao Zedong is not a good role model for society.
And that was really the problem. Sorry. The problem was that there was a... my little grandson is here. The problem was that people really embraced a kind of Marxist-Leninist ideology that was totally inappropriate and ineffective. And also, if you've studied history, you know that kind of Marxist-Leninist revolutions more often than not end up in totalitarian.
They never turn out well, do they?
Exactly. So it was flawed from the beginning. But I do think that people's motivation, at least, was very, very much geared towards trying to bring about positive change.
So you've been involved in the activist movement for at least 50 years, and looking at it as an anthropologist, do you think it was effective during all of this time, or have we just backslid completely there are more and more morons in our country?
Well, good question. Certainly looking at recent developments, it's very easy to be discouraged, but taking the long view, I think over the past 50 years, social movements have achieved a great deal. I mean, in the 60s, we really changed the way that this country addressed issues of race. Not that we eliminated racism by any means, but at least we instituted legal civil rights for minority. We changed attitudes towards sexuality, though of course we're seeing a huge reaction to that today as well. We really changed the way that people thought about relationships. We began to question authority in ways that I think were not part of the American mindset before. So I think in the long term, movements really have been very effective and are perhaps the only thing that's really succeeded in changing society, because it's through these kinds of social movements, grassroots upsurges of sentiment and activism, that issues are brought to the public's attention, and eventually politicians have to respond to that. I certainly recognize that there have been a lot of movements that have been ineffective and counterproductive, but in the larger view, I think social movements have been extremely important and continue to be. There's a quote from Margaret Mead that I sometimes use. She said, "Never doubt for a moment the ability of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, that's the only thing that ever has." So, the majority of people may be caught up in everyday life, and sort of the inertia of the quotidian carries them along day to day. But people who are activists and people who are able to participate in social movements have an outside effect, an effect much larger than the actual numbers of people who participate.
If social media had been around in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, what effect do you think that it would have had on the effectiveness of the activism at the time?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. I mean, certainly, and I'm no expert in social media, as I said earlier, I'm kind of computerphobic. But I do think that, you know, social media provides communication channels that would have been extremely useful then. And I think it would have been much easier to spread the ideas. If you think about the way social change occurred back in the 18th century with the Enlightenment, you know, it took 100 years. Initially, it was a tiny handful of people who had these crazy radical ideas, things like kings don't rule by divine right, and people have the ability to make decisions that affect their lives themselves. You know, these things really flew in the face of the existing social structure. And at that time, they were way out of the mainstream, and literacy rates were very low. There were fewer printing presses. Just got out there. They published books and pamphlets, and they were passed around kitchen tables and tavern tables. The ideas percolated for 100 years, and then they resulted in the revolutions that transformed society in very basic ways that brought, you know, liberal democracy into existence, really. And I see what's going on with social media today is accelerating those processes. We have the ability now to reach millions of people with one click of a button to get the word out. So it's certainly has negative effects as well. It's being used, I think, in some horrible ways to spread disinformation and to support the growing fascism that we see emerging. But at the same time, there is the potential for it to be used in very constructive ways. And I suspect in the 60s, it probably would have been, you know, the left and the anti-war movement that was more on top of those technologies than the right, and would have used them in ways that could have, perhaps, who knows, but certainly potentially could have had a big impact.
I have a personal theory that Trump was necessary in this generation to wake a lot of people up again in terms of looking at the value of human rights and the value of their current society and the things that really do need to change. I think that while he was completely unpleasant to have as president, and certainly somebody that I've used the term douchebag for quite often, I think he created such a major catalyst in terms of, I guess, polarizing moderates into wanting things to become different so that this type of thing doesn't happen again. I think it may have been something that was necessary currently, but, you know, I'm no anthropologist. I'm just some guy. I got a karaoke business. But I was just wondering how you feel about the previous administration.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope you're right, that he could polarize people enough that people in the middle recognize that they don't want that again. Obviously, it was the most destructive 4 years that I ever experienced in my life. And his failure to address the real problems that we're facing and his ability to invoke the levels of hate and resentment that he did, and to target the weakest and the most vulnerable in our society with that hate and resentment, it was horrendous. And, you know, unfortunately, he unleashed a movement which is now has turned to violence and has the potential to be extremely destructive. I mean, my big fear is that January 6th is just the beginning. And who knows? You know, you have more guns than people in America today. Most of those guns are owned by people who, I mean, I don't have any statistics to back this up, but my sense is that, you know, a lot of the people who are buying assault weapons are Trump supporters. We know that they're well organized. We know that the Ghost Keepers have 30,000 members, many of them active duty military and police. We know a little about the Proud Boys, who are growing in strength and size. We know about the 1%ers. Trump has his brown shirts ready, and he's very much in command. I think the last hearing this week pointed out that, you know, it was not a random event, the storming of the Capitol. It was something that was carefully planned. He knew what buttons to push. I remember when he told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by.
That was terrifying.
Yeah, and I remember when he said that There were good people on both sides in Charlottesville. The Nazis marching in the street were good people.
And the traitors on January 6th, he said, "I love you, but go home. I love you all. Like, I know you're my people, basically. Thank you for doing that." But
take down the mags, let them in. Don't bother with metal detectors. I know they have guns, but they don't want to hurt.
Yeah. Do you want to hear something really depressing, Dan? I have a friend in Canada, and you might know this since you're so close to the border if you have Canadian friends, is apparently it's infecting Canada. My friend's lived there for 15 years, and she says in the past 4 years, she's seen so many, like, freedom bumper stickers, like, this is our country. Like, Canada's becoming, like, infected by Trump, even though they're not in America. They're like, there's a lot of people up there who are, like, espousing that kind of lunk-headed bullshit, just like, we're proud for no good reason. We want freedom, even though we don't know what freedom exactly is.
Exactly. Keep the government out of my Medicare.
Yeah, but keep the government doing really bad things. Otherwise, they like that, starting wars and shit.
Yeah. Well, it's a movement that's gaining strength all over the world, unfortunately. Viktor Orban in Hungary, you have Erdogan in Turkey, you have this guy in Poland. Western Europe is not immune to these movements within the next 20 years. And it's very easy to mobilize people against someone who they see as the other. And that's what these fascistic types and authoritarians do. And it's a very old playbook. It's something that was really perfected by Hitler. And well, I know that in one of his divorce proceedings, one of the ex-wives said that Trump kept a volume of Hitler's writings on his bedside table. So
yeah,
he learned from the master.
What's depressing for me, though, like studying history, it seems like usually fascism arises when things are so bad. Like people are just willing to throw in their lot with anyone who has a strong voice and says, I'm going to make things better. They're just so, it's better than what they have. But America is like still pretty freaking prosperous when you look at all history. And yet we're just choosing fascism just because, like, why not? 40% of Americans are.
Greg, just interrupt. I don't know if you know that your video is off. We don't have your face anymore.
I have to hear. I want to hear it, Dan, and I have to keep the thing right to my ear, and I don't want you to see my ear hair.
Got it.
Sorry.
And we don't want to see your ear hair either, Greg. We'll have to sugar out your ear hair.
It seems like we're the first country where things were going pretty damn good. No Americans were starving. There wasn't like food strikes or food riots, and yet we're like, why not try fascism? Yeah. What the hell?
Well, there's a very strong current of white supremacy and racism in American society, and that's really what Trump tapped into. Working people are having a harder and harder time. I know, my parents' generation, my dad went to work. My mom was a homemaker. She stayed home, took care of the kids, cleaned the house. You could live on one salary. That's no longer true, really, in America.
Are you a native Vermonter, or did you come out of like New York?
Yeah, I'm originally from New York, but I've been in Vermont now. I came up here to go to college, and more or less never left.
So are you friends with Bernie Sanders and Ben and Jerry since you're in Vermont and you had your institute? Soon you must have come across them at some point, right?
Of course. Yeah, I know them. Vermont's a tiny state. That's one of the wonderful things about it is that it's a population of 630,000 people, and politicians are very accessible here. You can call the governor on the phone. If you go to a local parade, you're likely to meet Bernie and be able to bend his ear. It's a small community up here.
Tell Bernie hi for me. Tell him I love him.
Yeah, sure.
Big fan.
You could call him yourself and do that, Greg.
I guess. I'm curious, though, in the past 6 years since Trump came to power, did you ever find yourself thinking, man, Nixon was pretty damn good as president?
Why would he think that, Greg?
Because compared to Trump.
Well, yeah, if you're comparing him, but he wouldn't come to the conclusion of, he was pretty damn good.
Well, compared to Trump, I guess.
Not that he was good, but he was not as bad.
Yeah.
Right.
I think.
That's what I meant, I guess. Because I've had a lot of friends, my age who are like, yeah, George Bush Jr. looks like a great president now. At least he wasn't psychotic.
Yeah. Well, and that counts for something.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
That counts for lack of psychosis.
Yes. That'll be the new bar for president.
Yeah, exactly. It's the best we can hope for in a president.
You must be 35 years old, born in America, and lack psychosis.
Not a sociopath.
Yes.
Right. So you must be proud of the fact that your institute that you started back in 1974 is still going strong. I mean, I guess in the beginning it was probably hit or miss of like the survival of it, I would imagine, back in the day. So, you know, when did you finally retire from that role as being part of the Institute for Social Ecology?
Well, I'm still on the board. And
Okay.
I still participate pretty actively, but I have stepped way back, and there's a new generation of leadership in place. And I am proud. I'm very proud that we were able actually to make that transition, to move away from the founders to a new generation who can carry it on. A lot of organizations have a lot of difficulty making that transition.
That's very true.
And
Well,
also,
I
I'd
saw
like to do
also
a-
that you were once on the board of the Institute for Anarchist Studies, and so I was kind of curious about your relation to the anarchist movement. Were you a Molotov thrower, or what was your deal?
No,
Okay.
I was never. You have to make a distinction between anarchy and anarchism. Anarchism really it's a political philosophy, and it's a mixed bag. Daniel Guérin, the great French historian, said anarchism is like paper. It has a broad back. It can support anything. So you do have people who are bomb throwers who identify as anarchists, and you have pacifist, vegan, vegetarian, nonviolent campaigners who identify as anarchists as well. Dorothy Day from the Catholic worker movement considered herself an anarchist. So for me, there are many aspects of anarchism, many ideas that come out of the political philosophy that I find very appealing. There's the concept that we can have directly democratic decision making, that we could have true democracy, that we can decentralize society to a human scale so that we can have face-to-face interactions, which will require the kind of massive bureaucratic intervention that we experience today. There's a lot there that I embrace and that I try to incorporate into my own thinking and writing and into my life. And then there's a lot that's awfully silly as well. I think, there are individualist anarchists.
Do you think anarchy, though, is overly optimistic about human nature? Like saying we need no laws or anything? Because I think there's a lot of bad people out there. And I kind of want some kind of structure and laws.
I think, once again, distinction between anarchy and anarchism. Anarchy is no laws, no rule. Each individual for themselves. I don't believe in that. I don't believe it is a workable approach to social life in the least. But that's very different from anarchism.
Well, I know those anarchism people like the punk rockers in the 80s, and they definitely were very moral, ethical people who wanted a good society to work and function. But they'd also be like, we want no police, no jails. And I was just like, I think you need that. Hopefully there'll be better police than we have. But
I think we have to go through a social transition before we could achieve a society without some form of public safety. I don't know that it has to take the same form that policing does today. And
definitely not. I hope not.
In terms of jails and criminal justice, I think there's a lot that can be done there. There's a lot that other countries do there. My daughter lives in Denmark. And if you look at the prison system there, it's completely different. And they're really not intent on punishment, but they want to rehabilitate people and they want to.
It's like a 4-star hotel. They live better than I do in those prisons. I've seen documentaries.
No, it's a very different approach, and they have very low crime rates there.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to work.
So, and in terms of human nature, I can tell you as an anthropologist that our society has a very narrow view of what constitutes human nature. We think it's human nature to be greedy and inquisitive and violent, and all of that is really baked into humanity. Well, that's an aspect of human nature, but anthropologists don't even talk about human nature. We talk about a continuum of human behaviors, and certainly it contains the potential for violence and exploitation, oppression, greed, acquisition, undeniably, but it also contains the potential for caring and sharing and nurturance, and other cultures that have existed historically, and we have good evidence of their existence, have organized using very different social forms that emphasize and reinforce those more positive aspects of the human potential rather than rewarding them. But our particular system seems to reward people who are exploitative and violent. That's the nature of capitalism. So, and our educational system inculcates that in both formal ways and informal ways as kids grow up. So we're enculturated into a society that reinforces all of the worst aspects of human nature, whereas, anarchists believe that we could create a society that would instead reinforce these more positive aspects. I think it's naive to believe that we could ever have a society that's completely harmonious, that wouldn't have conflicts that had to be resolved one way or another. But I think there are different ways to approach those questions.
I think if we could lobotomize everyone in America, we could have that system.
I don't think a lobotomy would make that possible, Greg, because no one would have the intelligence or the mental wherewithal to be able to farm anymore.
It would be a very dumb country, but at least we wouldn't fight with each other.
Yeah, we'd all starve to death in like a week.
Yeah. I'm afraid we're already a really dumb country.
That's true.
Is that people are so easily manipulated, and the forces that manipulate them are so powerful. As I said, it's a society that's set up on a set of beliefs that are reinforced at every level by the media, by the economic system, by the educational system, by the family structure. It's a holistic kind of mechanism that leads people to assume these attitudes that are counterproductive and that even go against their own self-interest, which is why I say I think we're a very stupid country. At least in other countries, they have a working class that's aware that their interests may not align exactly with Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And
well, our podcast is evidence that it is a stupid country. We've actually proven that over and over again throughout the last few years.
Three of the country are stupid. Us.
Exactly.
Three people.
But I do want to kind of get back to your book, though, because we get off on we're getting very esoteric and very philosophical, and it's really fascinating for Greg and I, but probably not so interesting for any of the people who listen.
Can I ask one really quick question before we continue? Because what is social ecology?
This would be continuing, Greg, so you would definitely be asking the question.
What is social ecology as opposed to ecology?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Ecology it's really a philosophy. And it's an amalgam of anarchist thinking, Marxist thinking, ancient Greek philosophy, indigenous peoples' beliefs. It's an interdisciplinary perspective that tries to look at people's relationship to the natural world. And we do it using anthropology and philosophy, history, biological science. And it's a way to try to make some sense out of how humanity emerged and how we became what we are now. So there is that historical dimension and a deep historical dimension. We even look at evolutionary theory.
But isn't that just sociology? What makes it social ecology?
So because it's combining the disciplines, Greg.
Yeah, so it's heavy on how we deal with
on
nature
and anthropology with a focus on questions of nature. What is nature? Social ecology suggests that there's actually an ethical framework that evolution can provide for us. And then there's a political dimension. What do we do with our understanding of nature and people's relationship? And how do we transform it? How do we create a healthy society where there's a balance between the needs of humanity and the needs of the rest of nature? How do we address something like global warming? How do we address climate change? Those are the kinds of issues that social ecology examines.
And how do you address the issues of people who have a problem with the term global warming when they go outside and it's cold and they're like, there's no global warming? Yeah. So I understand that's where climate change came about. But seriously, I am curious because again, we've stated this, we have a stupid country and we got a lot of stupid people, and a lot of them are the legislators of our country, and many of them are the people who have voted them into office. So how do we get through to, and I know I've used the word before, but I'll use it again, how do we get through to the morons so that they are able to own the concept of climate change so that they can then be part of creating change that could do something about it? What's the methodology to make that happen besides, like Greg said, lobotomizing or electric shock therapy?
Well, I think it's multifaceted.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any one way that you're going to reach everybody.
Right.
But I think broadly speaking, it's an educational process. But education occurs in a lot of different ways, not just in the classroom, but through people's experience, through their involvement in various kinds of activities. And social ecology suggests that really we need to take a three-pronged approach, that we educate in traditional ways, classroom education, that we undertake popular education, which is a lot of what the Institute does, sort of unaccredited, just, if you find this interesting, here's a class you can take or books that you can read about it. So we need to do that kind of educational work. We also need to be oppositional. We need to protest. We need to say, no, you can't continue to pump tar sands through that pipeline. No, you can't build that nuclear power plant here. No, you can't continue to burn coal. We need to protest, and we need to have a public presence that puts pressure on the policymakers. At the same time, we need to create alternatives. We need to create cooperative economic forms that can begin to sustain communities and support them. We need to make transitions away from destructive, polluting technologies, which contribute to climate change, towards non-polluting renewable energy. That's something that the Institute began advocating back in the 1970s. We built the first models of solar energy and wind power here in Vermont back then, so that we provided practical demonstrations for people.
But Trump said that the turbines cause cancer, though.
They kill birds. They kill lots of birds.
Right, and they go, I remember that.
They're terrible. Yeah.
So you're responsible for causing cancer with wind turbines. Now we know who made that happen. It was the Institute for Social Ecology. Right.
Yeah, so
thanks, Dan.
Things like that. Creating alternatives, creating cooperative economic forms, producers co-ops, consumers co-ops, combining them, creating, and we have to take political action. I think that involves finding candidates in the existing system who support these ideas and can bring about those changes, but it also means changing that political system. And what social ecology advocates for is really a form of decentralized, directly democratic decision-making based in communities and towns. And it's interesting because it sounds quite utopian, but if you look around the world, historically, that's how many cultures have made decisions and governed themselves. And currently, there are some very active movements going on around the world. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Rojava, but it's an area in northern Syria where they've actually taken the ideas of social ecology and they've created a society of about 4 million people who are putting it into practice. It's the Kurdish people in northern Syria who.
I did spring break there. It was really fun.
Yeah.
I know of that area.
Yeah.
You were at the Kurds and Way part of Syria, Greg.
I don't know what that really means, but okay.
Well, the Kurdish people are the largest ethnic minority in the world that don't have their own nation. There are 40 million of them.
Isn't there a movement to create Kurdistan, though?
Yeah, that's what this essentially is done in Rojava. They have created a
Wasn't there a Kurdistan at one point? One was Kurdistan.
Kurdistan has never really existed as a.
Oh, never did. I thought it was a country at one point.
Not as a political entity. It's a geographic area, though, that encompasses parts of 4 countries in the Middle East.
So it's named after them, but they don't even run it. It's like
exactly. But as I said, in Rojava, they've created a society, and it's not a state. They don't want to be an independent nation state. They instead want to be a confederation of local self-governing communities that can come together to coordinate activity as needed.
So it's almost like an anarchy in practice. the nice kind of energy.
That's sort of what it is. And they actually have venerated and taken a lot of inspiration from the writings of a man named Murray Bookchin, who, along with me, co-founded the Institute for Social Ecology. He's sort of a national hero over there.
So you're an expert in this. Do you think that I've heard a lot of people say that even if everyone turned their minds around, everyone started being green, is it too late though?
Well, if we were to, stop putting carbon into the atmosphere today.
That's what I mean. Even if we stopped today, everything. If we went back to,
it would take 50 to 70 years for things to start turning around. But those are the kinds of long-term time frames we have to think about.
During the pandemic, like in the first 6 months of the pandemic, they were noticing a lot of major changes that were happening in nature when everybody stopped driving, Greg. So I think there's something that could definitely happen. But getting everybody to stop at once would require another pandemic, I think, for that.
Hey, that's a good idea.
Anyway, let's get back to Dan's book. He came here to promote his book, which is called Sugaring Down. You can find that on Amazon and Fomite Press and a number of other places. Dan, is there a website where people can get more information about your works and what you do?
Well, the Fomite Press website has descriptions they've published 2 of my novels. I have a collection of essays that was published by New Compass Press. You can go to their website. As I said, unfortunately, I'm computer illiterate, so I don't really maintain any kind of social media presence. But I would point people towards the Institute for Social Ecology's website, where they can find descriptions of some of my work and some of my previous essays and learn more about social ecology and the kinds of issues that I try to deal with in my fiction. So,
what would you say roughly on a commune? In those communes, how many of them were just these narcissist hippie fucks who'd come and not do the dishes and not contribute and just want to dick over everyone? I imagine there was at least 1 or 2.
Greg, his grandson's nearby. Watch the language.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Was there a significant number of people who were just like, "Oh, this is cool to be in a commune"?
It's funny because that's an issue that my book takes up. Certainly there were people like that, and I think there were a wide range of communes. There were some that were very serious and had a very clear mission, and others that were very amorphous and really were kind of anarchy. So it's hard to say what percentage was what, but certainly there were a lot of people. We're talking about young people who are.
I mean, in your experience, did you find a lot of people in the communes you hung out at?
Absolutely. My experience was there were a lot of people who were just there for a free ride.
Yeah.
And it was not a pleasant experience to have them.
Were you wishing that you were living on a commune, Greg? Is that why you're asking these questions? Or?
No, it's because it just reminds me of we were talking about roommates and those roommates who never do the dishes. I imagine it's the same thing times 10. Because it's
like you didn't plant the potatoes today, John.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody eats. If you don't weed the garden, we're not going to have tomatoes next month.
Right.
No one took care of the weevils.
The guy who won't do the dishes times 20.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Well, unfortunately, this does bring us we've kind of missed our halfway point where we do our cooking segment and then we go on and talk about our client for today. But again, I want to thank Dr. Dan Chodorkoff for coming on and regaling us with stories of anarchy and social ecology, as well as his own book, Sugaring Down. And your first book was called Loicida? Was that, you said the name of it was?
No, Loicida.
Can that also be found on Fomite Press as well, or Amazon?
That's a Fomite book as well. Yeah, it's a Hispanicization of the Lower East Side, where I worked for a number of years, and it's about an anarchist squatter in an abandoned building on the Lower East Side, and her relationship with her great-grandmother, who was an anarchist on the Lower East Side at the turn of the century, and then her interaction with the Puerto Rican community there, and fighting gentrification, all of that. It's a good read.
Interesting.
Sounds great.
That reminds me of it's those anarchists that made the FBI get created. So thanks for that. The anarchists from the turn of the 20th century, anyway.
I think the FBI were more about getting counterfeiters and stuff at first.
No, they were like really put together to like bring down the anarchists, I believe, in like the early 1900s.
The bomb throwing anarchists.
Yeah.
Well,
Big
there
organizations.
too, there was a very mixed bag. There were bomb throwers and there were union organizers.
So, Dan, if you want to stick around, I don't know that you necessarily want to, but again, we're going to do the cooking segment, and then we'll get into our client, and we also have an Ask Greg segment where he gives fake legal advice for people, too. But I'm sure you probably have better things to do with your time than...
Well, I've got grandkids visiting who are tugging at my shirt tail. Probably won't go. But it's really been a pleasure, guys, and thanks very much for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. And
Yeah,
at
thanks
some
for coming
point, we'll be giving you an invitation to our 3rd annual awards show, where you will be getting an award for having been on the show, but that'll be next June, because we just had our 2nd annual show like a few weeks ago.
I look forward to it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Dan. Totally appreciate it. And good luck on the sales for your book, Sugaring Down, everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. All right, that being the case, moving on to our cooking segment for today. So Greg can use the bathroom.
At Safe Mart, it's a Safe Mart. Come to Safe Mart and be safe.
Safe Mart is a proud sponsor of Food is for Eating with Waspy Soda Pop. Today's special, tapeworms. Only 20 cents a foot. Come get some at Safe Mart. Be safe.
Food is for eating. Food is for eating. Food is for eating with Waspy Soda Pop.
Hey there, everybody. This is Waspy Soda Pop. Food is for eating. Got a brand new recipe for you. It's going to get exotic. This is Zen Lotus Root Stir Fry. I bet you can't wait. First, you get 12 ounces of prep lotus root, 8 wood ear mushrooms. Remember, the ears must be made of wood. 1/2 a cup of diced red bell pepper, 1/4 cup of chicken stock, 2 teaspoons of oyster sauce, 3 ounces of sweat from a large Mahayana Buddhist monk, 1/4 to 1 teaspoon of salt, hard to taste, 1/4 teaspoon of sugar, 1/8 of a teaspoon of white pepper, 2 tablespoons of oil, 6 slices of ginger, 2 cloves of minced garlic, 2 scallions, white parts only, cut them into 1-inch pieces, 1 tablespoon of shaoqing wine, and 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. You want to combine that with a tablespoon of water. All right, now, here are your instructions. You bring a large wok of water to a boil, and that's not mean with your feet. That means it's a thingy that you put water in. It's wok, W-O-K. Anyway, you bring that to a boil. You blanch the lotus root, the wood ears, and the bell peppers for 45 seconds. Drain them thoroughly. Set them aside. Combine the chicken stock, the oyster sauce, the salt, the sugar, the monk sweat, and white pepper in a small bowl to create the sauce mixture. Set that aside. Add the oil to the wok over medium heat along with the ginger. Cook for 30 seconds to a minute. Then add the garlic and scallions. Cook for another 20 seconds or so, then add the blanched vegetables. Of course, now here's what gets very important. Walk away from the wok. Sit down and contemplate what you've been doing with your life. Determine if this is the best path in life for you. Decide, is this a stir fry? And does it poop in the woods? Clap with one hand. Then return to the wok. Stir fry the vegetables for 1 minute, then add the shaoqing wine around the perimeter of the wok, followed by the sauce mixture. Cook for 30 seconds until the sauce is at a simmer. Then add the cornstarch and water mixture, making sure the cornstarch hasn't settled. Stir fry for another 20 to 30 seconds until the sauce coats the vegetables, and you're done. Serve it. Then decide that all is well in the universe. And there you go. Some Zen Lotus Root Stir Fry for you, your family, and any other chuckleheads you happen to know. This is Waspy Soda Pop with Food is for Eating. See you next time. Bye.
It seems like a weird recipe for Waspy to be making.
Why do you say that?
He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who contemplates the universe.
Well, you know, maybe he was feeling philosophical because he hadn't had many episodes on in the recent past, and he had too much time to think, you know. Or...
I think Waspy transcribed it wrong, though, because you don't need salt after the sweat of a monk. That's all the salt you need.
Well, then I guess you could taste the sweat you've combined from the monk, I suppose. So I don't know if he transcribed it wrong or if he likes extra salty. It's the taste, Greg. So
I guess, yeah. I would just put more monk sweat in it, though. Why bother with pedestrian salt?
I guess it depends on how much monk sweat you get at a time. Like what containers do you have? Do you buy it like 1 gallon containers of monk sweat, or is it? Do you get it in like smaller amount? Is it hard to obtain? Can you only get it with like eyedroppers? Hard to say. I've never tried to buy any. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I
I
bet
don't
it
know how
comes in
it's-
those little like vanilla bottles, vanilla.
They probably have it at Safe Mart, though. I would imagine that's one of the
Yeah,
things
they
that
have
they sell
everything.
there. They do. They have everything at Safe Mart. I didn't
Yeah,
even know you could buy tapeworms, but hell, I might go get some.
by the foot, no less. They just have a big wheel. 20 feet of tapeworm. Bring him up.
However much you need. But anyway, all right. Well, we still got to ask Greg, so this will be challenging because we don't have Brendan here to man the computer to get the questions, but I think we can still make it happen. So
You got a computer.
let's do it.
He has an opinion, may not always be right. He's a real fake lawyer, he's old and he's white. Ask him a question, 'cause he's a good egg for bogus advice. Ask Greg. Ask Greg? Ask Greg!
Okay, well, this is the moment of the show, everybody, where we take questions from the audience, where they can ask Greg a legal question so that he can possibly answer that in his experienced and legal manner. Right now, we do have one person watching on YouTube. I don't know who that is. I don't know if they'll get a question off in time. But for now, I'm gonna go to like a legal website or something and see if I can find something that would be totally appropriate.
JacobianMyers.com.
What's that?
JacobianMyers.com.
Who's Jacoby and Myers?
They're not. I thought they were national. There was one of the biggest law firms that did commercials during daytime TV. Like, have you been wronged? Come to Jacoby and Myers. Like one of those. They were like a chain. I thought they were all over the country.
Okay, well, I think I've got a question here. Dear Greg, if I am part of an Antifa mob and I decide to graffiti a local Starbucks and they don't ever see me, is it okay for me legally to go in and ask for a chai latte?
Of course.
It
Though I
is.
do have to object to use of Antifa mob. What about Antifa protesters? You're
Well,
demonizing-
because it's not the protesters that do the damage to the stores. It's the mob that does the damage to the stores.
sometimes the lines are blurred.
Well, no, protesting is one thing, but then there's vandalism, which
This is
is a whole
true.
different thing. So, they
Well,
get
it
a
wouldn't-
different category. So the Antifa works as the adjective in this case.
Okay, I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, so
You
you've
weren't
got a
saying all
mob.
Antifa or a mob.
No, not
There's
saying that.
mobs within Antifa.
Yeah, because if you have any intelligence, you should be Antifa. You should be against fascism. you
Yeah.
know. But if you then decide to wear all black or a red bandana over your face and then go and throw a Molotov cocktail through your local jewelry store because your mother didn't pay your bills that week, then you're part of the mob. You're not actually part of something
wish you would
that's actually
explain
making
Antifa.
change.
I wish you would explain Antifa to like Tucker Carlson. It means anti-fascist. And
Oh,
you keep demonizing them.
Tucker Carlson, it knows exactly what Antifa
Yeah.
is. He just doesn't communicate it through the airwaves because that would mean low ratings.
Well, he also wants. He probably wants fascism, so he's just like.
He knows the wheelhouse that he's in.
Yes.
All of those guys are very intelligent individuals. They know exactly what they're doing.
I think so.
Yeah, they're doing it specifically to rile up society. Now, as in terms of their morality or amorality, that's a whole different other issue.
But they might believe it too. They might really want to be like, this is the enemy. These anti-fascists are
It's very
stopping.
possible. It is a world of morons. But anyway, so thank you very much for your answering the question, Greg.
No, I didn't answer the question. It's totally legal because it's a totally different issue. It was
Uh-huh.
illegal for him to spray paint on the Starbucks. And hopefully the police will capture him and beat the shit out of him.
That's what you
But
hope.
hopefully,
You hope for
in
brutality.
my wildest dreams, I hope that happens. But in the meantime, they didn't catch him. So yeah, he's allowed to buy a chai.
Why in your
A lot.
wildest dreams do you hope that they grab the guy and beat him? Why do you hope that?
Because Tucker Carlson just possessed me. And I need an exorcist.
You're suddenly taken by the ghost of Tucker Carlson.
I wish I could do that look he does where he pretends to be confused.
I don't understand.
You're so
Well,
crazy.
how
What
can
you're
you
saying is so
be?
crazy. I can't even
What
conceive
are
of
these
it.
people? You know, I think most of his viewers are liberals, honestly.
I watched him a bunch of clips just to be like, wow, know your enemy. Like, this guy, I can't believe what he's saying.
I watched one little clip of him and went, oh, this guy's like a total white supremacist. I'm like, I don't need to watch this guy anymore. I'm like, I've got the perspective done.
Yeah, you know your enemy enough that you don't have to
Well,
know.
he's not my enemy. He's just another talking head douchebag on Fox.
I think he's everyone in America, a real American's enemy.
The fact is that the people who seek him out want that perspective. They want that point of view. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes them the enemy. That just makes people looking for that particular point of view. They're the enemy to some people, just like we're the enemy to some people, right?
I think they're the enemy to you.
No one's the enemy to me, Greg. No one.
So racist, fascists, they came around, you just be like, yeah, they're not bothering me.
They're not my friends, but nobody's my friend either.
They don't have to be your friend. But they're enemies. They're like the Joker or Lex Luthor.
Oh yeah?
They're arch enemies.
How are they like the Joker and Lex Luthor?
Because they're evil and they want to bring shit down and ruin things, and we must stop them.
Well, not all of them necessarily want to ruin. They might want to ruin what you think is good but they think their thing is good,
I know,
and you're ruining it for them.
Wrong.
Well, that's your point of view, but from their point of view, you're wrong.
By letting people live in peace, like you can't argue the fact that I'm right.
Listen, you and Jen are two of the most liberal people I know, and you can't live in peace. So what are you talking about?
That's a scary point.
So I'm like, that you can coexist with nearly anybody, but obviously there are really legitimately evil people out there. I'm sure that serial killers are they can be Republican and they can be Democrats too. You know, those are the truly evil people. They have their own points of view on whatever. You know, some of them will become Democrats because of the fact they know that helps them fit in a little bit better. And so they can use that ideology to make friends and find new victims, just like Republicans.
They don't really believe it,
it depends upon who they're choosing to kill, who their particular insanity is leading them to in terms of how they get off.
Serial killing is an extreme form of sociopath. You know, like I don't care about anyone else's feelings. I get pleasure from killing people, even though I cause sorrow and misery.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, that's more in the Republicans' MO. Democrats are like,
but
I know they're
again,
corrupt, but
Abraham Lincoln was a Republican too, right?
That's a different thing. It's a totally different party. That's not the Republicans are dealing with today. It's not at all.
Even the Republicans we're dealing with today are changing. You know, the Republicans of 10 years ago have changed as well.
Yeah, for the worse.
It's all different.
And the Democrats, I mean, you got to admit, have changed for the better. They were the racist party until 1970 something.
I don't know if that's necessarily changed much.
No,
oh, come on. There's plenty of closet racist Democrats.
There are, definitely. Yeah. But the Republicans are actively trying to make racist laws like...
I think there's more quote unquote Karens in the Democratic Party than probably in the Republican Party, honestly.
Think so?
You know, yeah. I'm like, I'd be willing to bet on that one because they get out more. Anyway, so they're less stuck at home.
Yeah, barefoot and pregnant.
Exactly. Anyway, we have a client for today, and we've totally missed that window for the most part because we're already an hour in. But our client was Hippies versus Soap, and this is Greg's client. He pulled this one in probably because of our guest for today. I'm assuming that's the reason.
He was a good hippie.
I tell you, he was more to the left than you, but at least he had some good evidence-based information to back up his statements as opposed to you, which is I don't read much, but this is my point of view.
No, I read a lot. I stopped reading. I used to read a lot. But I'm saying I pretty much agree with everything he had to say. I think I'm as left as he is. I mean, everything he said, he agreed.
No, you're not, because he was an activist and he started a freaking institute, Greg.
No, he's had
yes, he did. Don't say no, yes.
But I gave him a thumbs up. If I was there, I would have been like, thank you for doing it. I'm too lazy and drunk to do it, but I agree with what you're doing wholeheartedly.
And if I was in the commune, you would be dying because I wouldn't be holding my weight planting those potatoes.
No, I'd be the opposite. I was a good roommate.
So what is it with hippies versus soap, Greg? Because that's
Well,
our client for today. So it's hippie versus soap. What's
It
the
was an
deal?
old joke, and growing up in the punk scene in the '80s, like hippies were the enemy more than like cops or Reagan. It was like people were just like every punk I knew was like fucking hippies, and I was just like, I don't know, there's some. What I read about the '60s, it was like they seem pretty cool. I agree with most of the shit they were fighting for, ending the war, but there was just this kind of thing like hippies. They're the enemy. We're rebelling against that whole peace and love. So we're going to be aggro, and I don't know what they were. They were.
What's that going to do with soap, though? Is it because they didn't use soap? They just used patchouli?
Well, there's an old redneck joke when the hippies came out. That's like something like, how do you hide something from a hippie? Put it under a bar of soap. Because they would never lift up the soap. Because they don't bathe. That old
commies. I don't think the hippies have ever gone away, actually. I think there's always been hippies. There's always been people following the Grateful Dead, even though they're not, they're still touring, but without Jerry Garcia these days. I think it's like Bob Weir's Grateful Dead or something like that.
Yeah.
But
and John Mayer sings for them now.
Oh, does he?
I don't know if it's still happening, but yeah, he was for years. He was Jerry.
Maybe he should change his name to Jerry Mayer.
He should.
Or John Garcia, like
Gerrymander.
Gerrymander. And I think that hippies are kind of an interesting construct. Where did the word come from?
Hipster, like hip. They're hip.
Well, where did that come from?
30s jazz, I think. But yeah, I don't know.
But wasn't that hep though back then? Like they were.
I think it was hep.
Hepcats.
But it was also hip to the jive. I think there was like old jazz songs called "Hip to the Jive" or use that term. I think hep and hip were like you could use either. It was like
maybe it came from like dancing where you had to move your hips, and you could say, "Oh, you moved your hip. That's a hip move." Like you moved your hip, and then it became that's hip, and they dropped the move part. This is our etymology discussion for everybody today. Yeah. Welcome to the derivation of words.
Because the word hipster.
Where do words come from?
Hipsters, like they used to call the beatniks hipsters, and that was like kind of a cool thing. They actually were like reading a lot, poetry.
But the Nick part of beatnik was a slam on communism. Whenever they added the Nick to beat, because they were part of the beat generation, the whole Jack Kerouac thing, it's them basically saying they're basically communists, these beatnik types, which for the most part they were kind of like socialists,
like a no good Nick.
Right. But again, the Nick part comes from, I think, a parchik, which is a Russian term.
Yeah.
I believe. That's my theory. It's a theory. I have no evidence to back it up.
Yeah, but, I mean, they were left-leaning. Definitely the beatniks were considered commies. Yeah. But they were considered hipsters, too. They were hip to, they were snapping their fingers all the time and just going, cool, big daddy-o.
Man. Yeah, like they go to listen to poetry and they snap their fingers because they like the poem that was going on. And
so
what the hell?
I don't know why they stopped saying hipster and started calling them hippies.
Well, the hippies were different from the beatniks.
They were, but I don't know who came up with
the beatniks were all into like heroin and cocaine and stuff, whereas the hippies were more into like the acid and marijuana.
Well, I don't think they really had acid in the late 50s. I mean, they did, but only like...
Well, they came in the 60s.
Scientists.
Well, the hippies came later. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Aldous Huxley could get his hands on acid in the late 50s, but no one else could. I bet the beatniks would have taken acid.
The U.S. government did.
Yeah. I think the beatniks would have taken acid if they had the chance.
Yeah, because they were shooting heroin.
Yeah.
They were doing a lot of that.
Because they were into jazz, so that was a jazz thing. The stereotype of the, heroin, reefer.
And they probably tried shooting up soap, and they realized that didn't work. And so that's why they probably pushed soap away. So they were like, no, soap is no good for drug usage.
And bleach to fight COVID.
There wasn't COVID then.
Maybe there was. COVID-1. Remember COVID-19? We had COVID-19. They had COVID-1, Matt.
Greg, you know where the 19 comes from, right?
I was trying to make a joke about it.
Yeah, it's just that joke has been overdone. But do you actually know where the 19 comes from, Greg?
It's something about some science mumbo jumbo.
No,
It's the
not.
19th chromosome in
It's
the
not.
virus.
It's not, Greg. You're so
I do
uninformed.
know that the word 18 before it. I do know that.
You're so uninformed. No, it comes from the year 2019 when it was first discovered. It was discovered in the year 2019, so they called it COVID-19.
Well, good for you.
That's the simplicity of it.
Okay.
It's nothing more complicated than that.
Well, maybe in 1958 they had COVID negative 23.
It would be COVID 58 now, wouldn't it?
I guess.
Because it would have been the year 1958.
And that's when they started injecting bleach in the soap.
Right. That's exactly what. But soap and bleach are different things.
They are. But they tried both. Because they were dumb beatniks. Taking orders
the
from the
beatniks
Kremlin.
weren't considered dumb though, but for some reason the hippies were considered dumb.
Yeah, because they were probably because they were taking acid and smoking pot. They were
it's because I think the hairstyles started to change, and they started looking different than other people, like the more conservative types of the time. Because we're coming out of the 1950s, which had like its share of gangs, the people wearing leather and the greased hair, and you didn't see people with long hair except for people who were just homeless or what have you. And so I think hippies looked homeless to those people, and so people thought, well, they can't take care of themselves, or they were like the younger generation of families who went off to like do whatever they went off to do and couldn't take care of themselves, and so
they didn't have money to buy a haircut.
Right. They did. They had to get their girlfriend to do it for them.
Yeah.
Or their boyfriend, or whoever, like they could steal a pair of scissors from,
But I do think the beatniks were more intelligent. They were like really into like they listen to jazz, which is kind of an intellectual musical form.
And poetry.
And, hippies would listen to dumb acid rock a lot of times. And like the beatniks were all about reading a lot, reading poetry.
Yeah.
Beatnik literature. There's no hippie literature movement. Oh, he's a hippie writer. There weren't any hippie writers.
Wasn't Abby Hoffman considered a hippie writer?
He wrote a book.
Or is he a yippie? Wasn't he a yippie?
He was both. He became a yippie. He started the Hippies, but he wrote a book, Steal This Book, which I think that's pretty funny. He made a book called Steal This Book, and then encouraging people to just steal it. But I mean, nobody reads that book now. It was the novelty of the time. It's like On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
Wait, isn't Abby Hoffman still alive? Did he die?
He did. I don't know though.
I don't know that he must be dead. I mean,
well, he's fucking old.
Dan Chodorkoff is still alive, and he was available during that time period.
No, he was a young man in the late 60s. Abby Hoffman. Oh my God, my brain is just...
Well, Abby Hoffman died young, but he could have still been alive. He was born in 36. That just makes him 2 years older than my dad.
No, but what's in his face? Howell. Allen Ginsberg was a young man in 1952. Yeah,
well, Ginsberg, old. I think, just died a few years ago.
He was old.
Yeah, Ginsberg, if I knew how to spell his name better, but he died 97. But he was born in 26, so he was 10 years older than Hoffman.
Oh, he didn't live that long.
What?
70 something. He lived 70 something.
So he still lived like 10 years longer than Hoffman did. So who knows?
Wasn't Abby Hoffman the one in the 80s became a total yuppie guru? And basically became a greatest good turd. I think one of those big yippie guys became a total, turned around and became a Reagan.
Wasn't it like the guy who was married to Jane Fonda, who was a politician?
At least I think he was a Democrat, though. You know what I mean? But I think Abby Hoffman or one of those guys just became a total, Wall Street industrialist, capitalist, apolitical. Just, greed, make money. Maybe, I don't know if it was Abby Hoffman.
It wasn't Hoffman because he was still doing activist stuff back in the 80s.
Okay, it was someone else then. Jerry Rubin I'm thinking of. Jerry Rubin became a total yuppie. The woman I used to walk dogs for, the old Tibetan Buddhist lady, ex-hippie. I mean, she's still a hippie. She still takes acid. She's 70. And she still hung out with the Merry Pranksters, which, was Abby Hoffman's old, and Ken Kesey, and all those people who hung out with Jack Kerouac. They still
Timothy Leary.
Yeah, I think he was part of it, maybe. Yeah. But they still have It's still a thing. But basically, they're the children of the original Mary Pranksters, it sounds like, for the most part. It's not a big thing. But they still meet every now and then. A lot of them are rich now. They're like rich old hippies, so they can be like, oh, we're going to meet in Tibet next year and have a big hoedown.
A hoedown?
Yeah.
Are they all going to do like Cotton Eye Joe?
We'd have a shindig in Tibet.
A jamboree, probably.
Yeah, but you would meet with the Mary Pranksters like once a year and have they take all kinds of drugs.
Well, isn't that what Burning Man basically is?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Very
Everybody gets together and they do something communal out in the desert, and it's all like this spiritual Carlos Castaneda thing where everybody's doing peyote or whatever.
Yeah, I think some people just go for the art, the music. They're not necessarily spiritual or political, but there's definitely a lot of hippies are there.
All right, but the client is hippies versus soap, so that implies that there's a fight going on between the two, like hippies on one side and soap on the other side, and soap.
It's just a dumb joke. I just thought it was funny.
You can't just minimalize it to just a dumb joke, Greg. You have to make it real. We have to make it real. It's hippies versus soap, for crying out loud.
I think I brought this up in the podcast before. I've read a lot of things about how weird it was that the average hippie dude was like, oh my God, he's so righteous. He's marching for the Guatemalan peasants and he's marching for the children of Viet Nam. But then they treat their girlfriends like shit and they'd be like, go cook my lentils, bitch. We're having a SDS meeting in our living room, and now you better.
All I know is that that's a new T-shirt slogan, Greg. Cook my lentils, bitch.
But it was so weird that they were so blind to that. Like,
yeah,
it's like that John Lennon song, I can't say it, but women are the N-word of the world. It's just like, oh yeah, you could be the most socially aligned guys fighting for all these causes, but then it's like, oh yeah, but women, they're still, you're still basically being a
I was watching this stupid show on Office Max. It's called Nathan for You. And there's this one episode where he's being interviewed for jobs and he's telling them that he wants to be called either Nate or the N-word.
That didn't fly, did it?
Or the other N-word. Something like that.
Oh my.
Anyway, I just thought that just kind of reminded me of that. Anyway, all right, so this has been the Law Offices of Quibble, Squabble, and Bicker. Brendan is not here, everybody, because he is preparing to be here in a day to move in with Greg for a brief period of time. It's coming. It's not the odd couple, though. It's the old couple. That's what they'll be.
The old odd couple.
Yeah. I don't know how long he'll be able to survive with you before he wants to, trample all of your human rights, Greg. So be very careful.
I'm a pretty easy guy to live with. I don't make many demands. I might have to instruct him about the recycling rules.
He might have an issue with you peeing in the thing that you clean the toilet with, the repository for the brush.
That was over years. A few drops kept falling in.
A few drops.
There's always splatter.
Where you just take a little eyedropper and pour. I gotta get a little more urine in that thing today.
I'm doing a little science experiment.
I want to see how long it'll take before someone notices it and says, "Clean it."
Maybe the urine will attain sentience if I let it for 2 years.
Yes, and you'll have this urine animal growing from your bathroom where it
a
comes
urine
out,
jellyfish,
and it decides to move into one of the other rooms in your apartment. It's like, you have created me, Father. I am joining you now.
It sounds like Little Shop of Horrors.
Feed me, Greg Moore.
Feed me, Greg.
Oh, yeah, we're getting off the rails. All right, well, so next week is going to be a regularly scheduled episode. We're going to see how the sound works because I don't know where Brendan will be for us to do the next episode. So that'll be challenging. I do have a special guest the first week of August, though. She is one of our publicists, and she's going to be. She's got a very interesting backstory. She's written some books, and she's met lots of interesting, famous people, and she's going to tell us a little bit about that. She's going to be, I think, actually a very fun guest because she's also from New York, so a lot of fun people from New York that we get to talk to. All right. Anything else, Greg? Anything else you want to
explain to anybody.
Anything else I want to excrete out of my mouth?
Yes. Do you have anything you want to add?
I can't think of anything. Be safe. Courage.
Remember, tapeworms, 20 cents a foot at Safe Mart.
Your consultation with the Law Offices of Quibble, Squabble, and Bicker has ended. You may pay your retainer at www.qsblaw.org. Please exit to the right of the water cooler and grab a candy from the front desk. We hope to see you again soon, but you need to leave now. I said leave. Why don't they ever listen? Get out! Get out!